Who has the right to U.S. citizenship? That's the central question of a landmark case before the U.S. Supreme Court today known as Trump v. Barbara. The case centers on an executive order that President Trump signed on his first day in office to end what's known as birthright citizenship. That's a U.S. policy that guarantees citizenship to any child born on U.S. soil. Well, the president's order ends automatic citizenship and instead makes it dependent on the parent's immigration status, denying it to those whose parents are undocumented or have temporary legal status. The order was immediately blocked in the courts, and it's now made its way to the highest court in the land. New Jersey's former Attorney General Matt Platkin led a lawsuit against the president's executive order, and he joins us now to talk about all of it. So good to have you with us. Thanks for taking a minute. Now, obviously, the case that you brought against the president's executive order is different than what's being heard before the Supreme Court today. But just tell us what you laid out in your arguments as to why this was unconstitutional.
Well, first of all, thanks for having me. It's very similar. The cases were very similar. The case that the court heard today was on behalf of private individuals. The case that we brought was on behalf of a coalition of states. And again, we filed that case 11 a.m. the morning after the order was signed. It was signed at 8 p.m. on his first day in office, the first time in 157 years that the President of the United States tried to rewrite the 14th Amendment to say that babies born on U.S. soil were not entitled to the same rights and privileges that they had been entitled to since the Civil War. An extraordinary act on day one. We sued immediately. We were successful. We actually litigated the case up to the United States Supreme Court. Our Solicitor General, Jeremy Feigenbaum, argued that case in order to preserve our right to seek what was called a nationwide injunction. But now the court has heard it a second time on the merits of the case. And let's be clear, there is no good argument that the government has put forth that the understanding we've had for a century and a half that babies born here are citizens of this nation they simply don't have any good argument to support their position.
Yeah, the case hinges on a phrase, I'm going to read it, in the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment that says, all persons born or naturalized in the U.S. and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the U.S. As we heard oral arguments play out today, what is your interpretation of the questions that some of the justices were asking in terms of how they're approaching this case?
Yeah, I think the justices, having been through many Supreme Court arguments, were quite skeptical of the government's position. Of course, they're going to ask probing questions of both sides. That's what the Supreme Court does, but clearly skeptical of the government's position. And again, we've said this since day one. Remember, it isn't just the text of the 14th Amendment, and there's really no good argument that subject to the jurisdiction thereof doesn't contain or doesn't include children born on U.S. soil. But the Supreme Court also considered the many over a century of precedent since the Wong Kim Ark decision in the 1890s, numerous acts of Congress that codified the exact same understanding that we put forth. So the federal government, to say they had an uphill battle would be generous. This was a political act put forth by a president attempting to usurp the powers of the Constitution and of Congress and of the American people to rewrite a provision in the Constitution that we had a civil war over. We had a civil war to settle whether babies born here were in fact citizens of this nation. And I think clearly the challengers to the order are going to prevail.
Yeah, you just referenced the Wong Kim Ark case, and the average viewer may not know what that case is. Can you just lay out what was argued in that case and what the case was based on?
Sure. Well, Wong Kim Ark was a child born here, and that case was in the 1890s, right around the same time, by the way, as the court was doing a whole bunch of other things that were not exactly quote-unquote progressive. So this wasn't sort of the most liberal court in American history, but it was about whether he was a child born here, similar to what we're talking about now, was in fact a citizen of this nation or whether he was a citizen of somewhere else. And the court said clearly in that case that birthright citizenship under the 14th Amendment is the law of the land, codifying the understanding that we had had since the amendment in 1867. And again, following that decision now 125 years ago, we have had numerous acts of Congress and numerous cases that relied on it. No one questioned it. No one seriously thought the 14th Amendment didn't say exactly what the Supreme Court said in Wong Kim Ark, that everybody born here had understood it to say since that time, until this president came into office on January 20th, 2025, and took a Sharpie to the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. And that's why I was proud to lead the coalition of states fighting it. I'm proud to stand with many, many advocates across the country who are standing up today in court and across the country, speaking out for the rights of immigrants in this nation, people born here who enrich this nation, who pay their taxes, who run businesses, who are Americans. And we're saying that in New Jersey, in a state that lives in the shadow of the Statue of Liberty and of Ellis Island. I don't think we could have been a more appropriate lead state for this case.
Let me ask you this. What are the possible implications, depending on how this court rules? Either way, we do know that the Solicitor General said that this would not be retroactive to people already here if the Trump administration rule took effect. But what are the potential implications here of this ruling?
Well, first of all, he's saying that for this argument, but that has no binding effect on the administration. They have argued in court that the president unilaterally can decide what is constitutional under the 14th Amendment, or arguably, if they're right, under any provision in the Constitution. An alarming and crazy escalation of presidential authority. But the practical consequences of this is not a theoretical risk. The practical consequences would be extraordinary. The order that the president signed says that babies born here under certain conditions are not U.S. citizens. It doesn't say what they are. It doesn't give them a second class of citizenship that we've never had in this nation. It doesn't say what nation they are citizens of. So you could have this permanent subclass of residents of this nation that don't belong to any country. And for states, you think about the benefits we provide, educational benefits, healthcare benefits. How are you going to go through and parse through what rights and privileges a child has? I think Justice Jackson asked, are you going to have to depose the mother to determine what rights the baby has? It's an absurd formulation. And I think the fact that this administration, when they put forth the order, they said it would come into effect in 30 days. As a reminder, this administration can't even get you in the airport in under 6 hours, but they're going to figure out how to impose a new class of citizenship in 30 days. It's not serious. It was a political act, and it was a flagrant violation of the Constitution.
We did hear the Trump administration attorney, John Sauer, say, that there are countries, he referenced China, who are sending people here to give birth and then leave. And he says it's a whole new world. We heard Chief Justice John Roberts say in response, it's a new world, but the same Constitution. So just kind of playing out there some skepticism in terms of that argument. But let me just quickly ask you in the short time we have left. 24 states originally, I believe, filed the lawsuit to seeking a preliminary injunction. What happens to those cases now, depending on the ruling here? Do they move forward? Does this set precedent?
Well, I'll certainly let the state speak for itself, but I assume, and I think the general view is based on the arguments today, that the court is going to side with the advocates challenging this order. I think they are going to reaffirm that what they said in Wong Kim Ark, that birthright citizenship is the law of the land. And hopefully that ends this, and this administration stops trying to strip away the rights of babies born here. But certainly I know the states that were in that coalition, who I was proud to litigate with and who stay strongly on the side of immigrants born here, will continue to fight for birthright citizenship and continue to fight for the rights and privileges of all Americans and the rule of law. This is not an abstract concept, like I said. The rule of law means the president cannot tell a mother that their child born here is not an American citizen simply because he wants to.
And to be clear, our current Attorney General, Jen Davenport, did carry forward the case that you initially brought. That's all the time we have. We have to leave it there. Matt Platkin, former New Jersey Attorney General and founder and partner of the law firm Platkin, LLP. Thanks for taking some time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.